Hello, everyone. My name is Allie, and I like to talk about politics, history, and media. And I watched the new Reagan movie. And I don't have anything positive to say about it. So, yesterday I was at the gym and I was like, oh, I'm right next to a movie theater. So, let's go see a movie. And I saw that Reagan was playing. I've heard bad things about it, and I was like, okay, but maybe I could get some type of history experience from this. Maybe it'll be a little bit of a nuanced take on Reagan. Because when you make a movie about a person that actually exists, you kind of have to show their flaws. And it could be their accomplishments too, but you also have to show their flaws. And that's with any character, real or fake. Every movie should have a character that is able to have flaws and mess up and be a human being. That did not happen in this movie. No, it was just squeak, squeak, squeaky clean, just squeaking his reputation clean. We'll get into it, but the director, Sean McNamara, could not present Reagan to have one single flaw. I just want to take a second to appreciate this filmography. Do you think Reagan would have wanted this man telling his story? Because, oh boy. The most flawed Reagan gets in the whole movie is maybe when his acting career isn't going as well. So maybe he's a bit oh, he's down on his luck. He gets bullied one time as a child. He maybe is poor, his dad's an alcoholic, but he's never shown to have any personal failings. It's all just life is just not going the best for him, but he's becoming a hero. So before I get into the things that happen, I debunk some of the history, I talk about some things they left out, I just want you to know how this movie is presented. Because this movie is narrated, kind of. That's one of the things. The cinematography, the editing, it makes no sense, and it changes every 5 minutes. I feel like I'm watching a completely different movie, which is extreme whiplash because this movie is 135 minutes, which way too long for what it was. But just imagine 135 minutes of the editing style changing every 5 minutes. So the narrator was not Reagan or any American. The narrator was Victor Petrovich. There's this article on slate.com. It's written by Paul M. Renfro, who does a fantastic job criticizing this movie. It's called Ronald Reagan is Back on Screen. A new biopic has some very odd ideas about the former president's record. I highly recommend you go read that one because it did a really good job pinpointing some specific historical points. But it does talk about this Victor Petrovich character, and the way he's used in the movie, I think is absolutely not how he existed at all. Even if he, when I look up Victor Petrovich, it comes up with Victor Ryukinov, who was the manager of construction of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. If I googled this and that's the guy who they're trying to portray in the movie, not at all what he does in the movie. He's kind of like this conglomerate of Red Scare propaganda. Okay, I decided to look it up one more time, and no, this guy's literally just a person they made up. How on par with conservatives that their icon movie, the bad guy of it is just a made up person. A biopic, they still had to make up a bad guy. What the hell? This is the weirdest part. So Petrovich is this kind of secret agent, and he's kind of set up to be this guy for the USSR, and he's studying people in a way to try to uproot capitalism in the free world. And their focus is on Ronald Reagan for some reason. They're just let's study him his whole life. From a child, they're this is the crusader. That's what they call him. They're this is the crusader. This is gonna be the guy who defeats communism. That's how the story of Reagan is told, through the lens of Soviet people who still are he's perfect, he's the crusader, he's gonna be the guy that ends us. So just imagine the whole time as I'm explaining my criticisms that's how that's being presented. There are some moments where Reagan's talking, there's dialogue and stuff, but I'll be into the dialogue scenes, maybe he'll be meeting with Thatcher or whatever, and then all of a sudden I'm oh yeah, the story's being told through this Russian guy. Okay, got it. Okay. It makes zero sense. What a terrible decision to tell a story through the enemy, but like the enemy doesn't even really hate them. It's so weird. Okay, you guys are never gonna believe how this movie begins. If you guys have watched my channel before, I did a deep dive into John Hinckley and the shooting of Reagan. I think you can see where it's going from me just mentioning that. The first thing shown was the date, I think it was March 30th, 1981, 2 months after Reagan got inaugurated. And that date was very familiar to me, and I was like, no shot, pun intended, no shot. They're starting this movie with the assassination attempt. And that's exactly what they did. Also, I just found out that Reagan was supposed to speak at the Oscars that day, but he got shot. Just a fun fact. That was in the Slate article I read. I was like, where are they going with this? Because from what I was thinking this movie would be about, I thought it was kind of just about, the Cold War and how Reagan was a key player in ending it and overseeing the defeat of the USSR, which is not like 100% true, but you know what, I thought that was going to be the take on it, and it was to the nth degree. Like, the mantra of the movie is that Reagan was the key player to the downfall of the USSR. Like, he single-handedly defeated the Soviets. He ended it. The Cold War done, finito, after Reagan. But starting off the movie with the shooting was a choice because they showed, him walking out. They recreated the picture, the one where he's like waving right before he got shot, the famous one. Shot rings out, and it's immediately like it cuts to media headlines and, just talks about how the immediate reaction and how there were rumors that Hinckley was, like a Soviet actor, he was associated with communists and the Soviets. And the movie presented that as fact. I think it clarifies it later in the movie, but it's so brushed. It's just the presentation of it literally implies that Hinckley was a Soviet actor, which is so dishonest and dangerous to present it that way. I mean, I don't even have to explain it. If you want to hear an explanation on why he actually did it, I made a video about that. You can go watch that. Even vaguely implying that he had any communist sympathy is just dishonest and dangerous. The only attempt on Reagan's life was not a Soviet. It wasn't even political. It wasn't even a political thing. But, line number one immediately, cat's out of the bag.
Cat's out of the bag.
It was just a bizarre way to open up the movie. And then they kind of started to go for a bit of a chronological thing. It cut back to his childhood. I was like, oh, so they're gonna go through like chronologically through his life. That was just like, when he thought his life was about to end. I didn't really understand the choice, but I was like, okay, like we're going chronologically now. No, it didn't really stick to a timeline. It didn't really make any sense. It was him as a kid for a little bit, and then it cut back to him as an actor with his first wife, and then it cut back to him as a teenager. And by the way, the guy who played Reagan as a teenager is David Henry, the guy from Wizards of Waverly Place, who looks nothing like Dennis Quaid or Ronald Reagan. Honestly, Dennis Quaid doesn't look like Ronald Reagan. Do you guys agree with me? Like, they didn't even try. Like, I could see if they put like a little makeup on him. I feel like he needed a little more not only special effects, but they needed a makeup artist to like maybe restructure his face a little bit, because I was not having it. I just felt like I was watching Dennis Quaid. Love your son, but you are a terrible actor. So the storytelling, bizarre, confusing, out of order, the choice to have a narrator that was Soviet, weird. Also, I did take notes as I was watching. I kind of noticed immediately that Sean McNamara was clearly going for the Oppenheimer feel, even with the soundtrack. Like, it wasn't good. Like, Oppenheimer, like, I would say is the best biopic I've ever seen, and is, like, one of the best movies I've ever seen. The way it's presented is so honest, and, they present it as an accomplishment, but the accomplishment had a cost. And it's a very honest and human presentation of what it was like to build the bomb and what consequences that had and what Oppenheimer was thinking. And, he felt regret, he felt remorse, he felt guilt for the people he indirectly killed. That's what made Oppenheimer so good. Also, the soundtrack is amazing. The intensity, there were stakes. So this movie trying to go for the Oppenheimer film without presenting their guy as a flawed character, it just doesn't work. It doesn't work. And the accomplishment, it didn't even feel like he accomplished anything. They didn't even present it as something that was a huge triumph. It was more just like, oh, he said a thing, and then we're all cheering.
What's he gonna say?
Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
Well done, cowboy.
That shot is hilarious, but also I don't know why they included Margaret Thatcher, because she was literally very against German reunification. Like, the wall being torn down was like her worst nightmare. That's how it felt. I mean, that's kind of how it was in real life. Like, he just said the thing and people cheered and he didn't really actually do anything. But they didn't even like present it in a way where I was like, yeah, they make him seem kind of awesome. Like, no, I was just like, he's just saying stuff. So yeah, it's clearly trying to go for an Oppenheimer feel with the soundtrack. They try to even do the cinematography. If you've seen Oppenheimer, they have the scene at the table. They're all sitting around the table and maybe it'll circle around, but it still has like cuts. Like if someone's specifically talking, it'll cut to like their face. I really like that scene because it just felt like we're really involved in one of these conversations in this conversation with these historical figures, and they kind of tried to reenact that. It was a Screen Actors Guild ball, and Reagan was there with like his first wife, and they were just talking about like communists in Hollywood, and it just felt like so inhuman, the conversation. And it was clearly a recreation of that scene, but it was just spinning around like endlessly. Like the camera just kept spinning around the table as people were talking. It never even really focused on the person who was talking, and it made it impossible to follow the conversation because I felt like I was never looking at the person who was speaking. I also apologize because since the movie just came out, I unfortunately can't get like little snippets and clips to explain. You're just gonna have to believe me. I'm trying my best to like illustrate what it felt like watching this because I don't want you to go see it, but I can't show you. There's a lot of things about communists in America that they just simply got wrong, or just things that were never proven that they present as fact. That was the biggest problem with this. They imply things that, were rumors but were never proven to be true. The narrator, the Russian guy, so whenever we see Soviets, they have conversations in English, by the way. The Russians have conversations in English, so they weren't even really trying. Like, you could have at least tried to like hire a guy who knows Russian so they could have Russian conversations in the movie. Didn't even try that. They tried to put on accents for the Russian people a bit. Maybe the most comedically bad Russian accents I've ever heard. It was honestly hilarious. I'm just like, no way they were just like that blatantly like, we're infiltrating the colleges in Hollywood, we're placing our people everywhere. They even nodded to Oppenheimer. They had like a cutout in Oppenheimer, just like his picture with Reagan, and also a headline about how the Soviets infiltrated the Manhattan Project, which that was definitely true because like, yeah, they would totally want to do that. If your biggest enemy is a superpower that's trying to make a bomb that could destroy Earth, yeah, I think I'd want to get in on that too. I'm gonna be, not to like sympathize with any of that, like we should not have built a bomb that can wipe out the entire Earth, but to sympathize with the other side, I think I'd want to be in on that, or at least have a know of like what's going on. So that was definitely true, but then they were like, yeah, the Soviets, like the Vietnam War protests were just Soviet-backed stuff, and they're kids that they don't know what they're doing or talking about. They implied that the kids don't even know what the Vietnam War was. They don't emphasize the intensity Reagan had towards those protesters, especially when he became governor of California. He went really hard on them. It's crazy because they are honest about some things, but they don't present it to be as to the intensity that it was. For example, with the protesters, they show a clip of the protesters and it's like they're hippies and like they're showing threatening signs that they were holding make Reagan look really bad. But they don't even address them. They're like, oh, those silly kids with their signs. What do they know? Like, maybe you should address why people are saying that the new Jim Crow is happening. Like, maybe if you're gonna show that, debunk it, you know? But no, they show it and are just like, LOL. And they do the same with the Vietnam protesters, where they're like, we deployed the police and the National Guard because the kids are so stupid. Which is so crazy because people were killed. Protesters were killed by the police and National Guard, and that wasn't acknowledged, but they were like, it was just presented that deploying the National Guard was the correct thing to do. And that was just that. He's like, I deployed the National Guard, LOL, those stupid kids, bye. And that was it. That was all that was presented. When, like, people died. People did die. And then again, when the Russians were having conversations, they were like, we're infiltrating Hollywood and unions and social movements. So later, when Reagan was union busting and destroying people's careers in Hollywood, it was like, okay, like it was shown to be okay because, you know, the Soviets were, it's not, none of it's real, it's all a Soviet, you know, psyop or whatever, which I don't know if you know, but the union busting and Reagan preventing federal workers from striking, all of those anti-union activities and legislation he did made striking go down so much. Legia Miller has a really good video about how Reagan destroyed everything, I think it's called. No, it's how Reagan ruined everything. Really good video, and she gets into that. But like, because of him and because of policies like that, union busting and just preventing workers from striking and those becoming more strict, striking has plummeted to the point where we're barely seeing strikes anymore because it's just so difficult and honestly too much of a hassle for a lot of people who are just straight up don't have the money to just stop working. And that's because of policies like Reagan. But no, he is our crusader who destroyed the evils of communism and knew about the economy. But they do try to rehabilitate his anti-union stance a little bit. One, by saying like, oh no, none of the union strikes are real, like it's all Soviet stuff. They said in the movie, they said all unions are trying to unite into one to overthrow the government, which like, when, I've never heard of that in my life. Let me know in the comments if you've heard. Was that a thing people were actually scared of, and was that a thing people were actually planning on doing? I might do research on that later, but I genuinely don't know. That feels a little ridiculous. But also, since he was the president of the Screen Actors Guild, which is a union, or a guild, but you know, same functions, they allowed him to use that as, oh, well, I was the president of a union, so, you know, how can I be anti-union? He used that a lot to his advantage to, you know, screw over the working class. And it's just shown in the movie as like, oh yeah, he did know better because he was the president of the union. And he did know what he was doing because of it. And it was like, he did know what he was doing because of it, but like, he used it in a nefarious way. And that's the part that they just don't touch on. Oh my god. And also, while he's the president of the Screen Actors Guild, you know, that's around when he became like more and more anti-communist and started to disdain the Democratic Party. He became an FBI informant. I didn't even know this until the movie, but he did. But the movie was like, oh, this was a good thing though. This was like during the Red Scare, so this was like the 40s. So around when this was McCarthy time. So they implied that him being an FBI informant during the Red Scare was a positive, that was a cool thing that he did. Like, he was like a spy. Like, ooh, he's finding all these filthy communists and reporting them to the FBI. How cool. Like, that's so icky. Like, ooh.
Brother, ugh.
Like, that's embarrassing. Being an informant to the FBI and ratting out your colleagues, like, that's embarrassing. They do touch on the fact that Reagan was divorced. Like, he had a first wife that he had kids with, and they do her so dirty. Like, I don't know actually how she behaved in real life. Like, I don't know anything about her. She's literally just the evil first wife, ball and chain that doesn't let him do anything. But honestly, the real story is his career was failing and he became psychotic about being anti-communist. So she divorced him. Like, that's the true story, but she's presented to be just like, she can't deal with a husband with beliefs and he's become too much. Like, no, she was just sick of him being crazy about the whole Red Scare stuff, and her career was doing better and he was mad about it. And then good old dainty Nancy comes in, perfect submissive wife. They don't touch on this in the movie, but Nancy is actually one of the big reasons Reagan did make the switch to the Republican Party. They make it seem as if it was a natural thing that happened to him, and I think that's partly true. But I think the real switch came when he married Nancy, because she was a hardcore conservative, a hardcore Republican, like she had been her whole life, and she was definitely, the last push to get him to move to the Republican Party. But because they need him to have that hero, like, my mind and opinions aren't affected by anyone else, like, I'm a free thinker, they needed to have that Reagan. That wasn't touched on at all, which I thought was an interesting choice, but not surprising. I mean, it's beneficial to the conservative movement to present Reagan as someone who had his own opinions and growth as a human being that wasn't affected by anyone else, and also have Nancy Reagan be this like submissive dainty wife that just supports whatever her husband does, when in reality Nancy actually, like, not to defend Nancy, but she did have a lot of autonomy and power, and a lot of people even argued that a lot of the choices that Ronald Reagan made during his presidency were influenced by her. But is that shown in the movie? No, it's never shown how much power Nancy had, which I thought was interesting. Also, they never talk about the astrology stuff, the astrologer stuff, that scandal, never talked about. And they don't really talk about Don Regan, that guy. They talk about Iran-Contra, but Don Regan, the main guy involved with that, they kind of avoid him because, after Reagan's presidency and after Iran-Contra, he did not have good things to say about Reagan. And he did write, I think, a memoir about him. Not good. I think I watched a video from The Cynical Historian, made a video on Ronald Reagan, and that video does touch a little bit on Don Regan. I also just recommend that video in general. If you are more interested in just having a more cohesive biography of Reagan that is critical of his legacy and honest, I would say go watch Lee Miller's video and go watch the Cynical Historian's videos. Those are both really informative and really good. So Nancy is seen as like this huge like pull, like Reagan made the W with her as a wife, and they go on a first date and it's supposed to be this huge reveal. And not to be vain, like this is kind of just me being mean, but they try to reveal it like she's Cinderella, but the reveal is, oh my god, it's the ugliest dress I've, maybe not the ugliest, but the dress is not cute. It's not a sleigh, it's not a serve. She did not eat, I fear. And then their second date, they go horseback riding. I'm like gonna throw up thinking about this, but they have their first kiss. And god, Dennis Quaid and whoever the actress that played Nancy is, the chemistry is like cranked all the way down. Like, and they did it like open mouth. Like, it was kind of aggressive, like making out too. But there was just no chemistry, so I was just there like, the average amount of chemistry for a conservative straight couple, I would assume. That was just a side tangent. I just had to let you know they did involve like their budding romance, and it was zero chemistry, really awkward. Also, that actress that played Nancy, this is so mean, but she was so terrible. She was, oh my god, all the actors were so terrible. There was like not a believable delivery the whole time. Not to say I think I could do better, but I'm not a professional actor and I don't actively pursue that. So acting was just atrocious, and I was like, these are not human beings. Like, I don't know if it was the actors or the writers or both, but I didn't feel like I was watching human beings. I was like, what is going on? Anyways, another thing is when Reagan's getting to the point where he's trying to become president, he first ran in 1976, but he lost the Republican primary to Gerald Ford, and they present that election in a really dishonest way. They kind of imply Gerald Ford stole that election, which there's a couple of things that are weird. They show a rally, or I think it's the RNC. It's some like convention where they're appealing to voters. It might be the RNC. I don't know. It's not very clearly stated. But there's people in the crowd holding signs, and they literally show guys in the crowd switching Reagan signs for Ford signs, and people just go along with it. Like, they kind of implied Ford stole the 76 election, which is really funny because why would you do all this to steal the Republican primary? But then he lost the general election. He didn't win the presidency again. So, what? If he cheated in the primary, why would he not do that in the general election? That makes no sense. And also just a hilarious scene. Like, no, that did not happen. Ain't no way. You know how conservatives are. I mean, I don't know how different they were back then. I don't think they were that different. You know how they are. Imagine if someone went up to a conservative and tried to replace their Trump sign with an RFK Jr. sign. They would smack you. Are you kidding me? Anyways, just that was a ridiculous moment. They don't touch on it a lot because, again, the main like mantra of the movie was Reagan defeated communism, but they do touch on Reaganomics a little bit. They completely ignore that he immediately slashed welfare. They don't talk about welfare at all. I don't even think they mention like welfare queens, which was one of Reagan's most famous quotes, and they just completely ignore that. Probably because it's controversial and a really disgusting thing that he said, because it was racist and dumb, and based on one case where a woman stole only $8,000. Only, but like he was saying it was $150,000. No, it was $8,000. And it became a stereotype based on one case, so yeah. But they do have a point where he's like in the White House at a table, and they just refer to it as he wants to cut taxes. He's like, we're cutting taxes. I said I would. And people at the table are like, you can't just do that, or like they were opposing it a little bit in like a lame way. His rebuttal was like, I know a little bit about economics. When people have more money, they spend more money. That's it. It was like a 2-minute, maybe 2-minute conversation about taxes and economics. And it was just that we're cutting taxes so that people have more money to spend. And that's how economics work. Maybe if you're 15 and taking your first economics class, that's like the thing you learn on your first day, maybe. But, oh my god, if that's not the most dumb take I've heard on economics, oh my god. I'm gonna finish off with the most appalling things in the movie to me, and that was the way they responded to criticisms of Reagan, which was not just spoiler alert, not at all. They do have a little bit of Reagan as like a teenager young man, which is, again, David Henry from Wizards of Waverly Place. One of the things they do is try to rehabilitate Reagan to be some type of like anti-racist, like white ally, which, you know, maybe he had black friends, but he was totally a racist. Are you kidding me? He was 100,000,000% a racist, but they're like, no, he's not racist, and they show, because he did football, like, as a young man, and I guess, he had 2 black teammates who couldn't stay in a hotel because they were black, which is disgusting and terrible, and they show a scene of Reagan inviting them to just stay at his house instead, and that's, like, supposed to be, like, a big heroic moment of, like, anti-racism, like, he's an anti-racist king, he's so pro-black, he has black friends, and he treats them really well and fights for them, which could be true. The story could be true. However, they don't talk about how he opposed the Civil Rights Act, which was later. So, who's our anti-racist king now? But they don't talk about that. No, they don't. They do talk about him supporting Goldwater, which I think is really weird because Goldwater is famously one of the most insane politicians ever. They ignore that he had connections to the John Birch Society, which, again, similarly to Goldwater, who was I think was part of the Birch Society. Goldwater was not a part of the John Birch Society, however, he was very sympathetic to the cause, so. The Birch Society was one of the most insane conservative organizations to ever exist. It just was, period. And they don't talk about that, because that wouldn't look good on Reagan's reputation. No, it would not. But yeah, they ignore a lot of his connections and opinions to make him seem like, oh, he did everything correct. Oh, there's also a really funny scene that showed him as a teen. I don't know why they put this in. They did a lot to gas Reagan up and be like, oh, he's so hot. He was so hot. Oh my god, he was so hot. Like, they just really wanted the audience to believe that he was this total stud. So when he was a teenager, I guess he was a lifeguard. I highly doubt this was true, but they showed a scene of a woman pretending to drown so he would save her. Would you guys pretend to drown to have David Henry save you? Like, let's be honest. Let's be real. Like, why did you keep that in the movie? Okay, so talking about the choppy editing, the way they showed, like, the dissenters, the people that didn't like Reagan, was often through, like, a compilation. It felt like a slideshow, honestly. Like, sometimes it would be, like, they had a lot of, like, 2-minute long just reels of news headlines. It just felt like those never ended. And, like, why do you have to tell the story through headlines? Like, why not just show what he did? It was just so messy. But yeah, when there were moments of extreme criticism during his life and his political career, they'd show it through, like, the compilations. So that's where you could see signs where it'd be like New Jim Crow, and that would just not be addressed. And then the one that had me floored, like, when I tell you I, like, almost walked out there, but I, like, so badly just wanted to finish it so I could talk about it and hopefully no one else will go see this movie. They showed up, was it like a quote? It was just like a common criticism that people were saying during his presidency, that Reagan did absolutely nothing for the 1,000 dead from HIV and AIDS. They showed that. Did they address it further than that? No. So, like, is that a positive or negative? It was more just shown to be like, look at what his weird critics are saying. Like, aren't they silly? And the criticism is true. Like, it's literally true. Thousands of people died from AIDS, but it was mostly, you know, queer and people of color. And so he did nothing. He didn't care. But, like, in this biopic, it's just shown as, like, just some people were saying, like, that's bad. He did do that. He did do that. But it was presented like it was nothing. Oh my god. That made me furious, because that is easily, I would say, the worst thing Reagan did. Just, like, sitting by. He didn't even say anything until right at the end of his presidency. It was going on the entirety of the 80s, basically. I think I saw, when I was researching it, people became aware of it around, like, 81. So by the time 83 rolled around, it was, like, a big deal. He was just ignoring it. And I don't think he talked about it until the late 80s. Until, like, right at the end of his presidency. Because one of his friends died, and one of his friends was gay. I forget the name of the guy, but that's the reason he talked about it. It had to take someone he personally knew dying from it to talk about it, but they didn't bring that up. They didn't address HIV/AIDS at all, which is so disgusting to me. I was, like, about to throw up. Vile work, Sean McNamara. You should be ashamed of yourself. That is disgusting. I think anyone can agree that people should have been more sympathetic and done more about people struggling from AIDS. And conservatives aren't gonna like this, but you know who was trying to do something about AIDS and probably made an impact on a lot of people's lives? Anthony Fauci. Yeah, live with that one. And the last thing I want to talk about is how they address the Iran-Contra scandal, because honestly, that was the messiest part, because they do present it as, like, his one big controversy. It's kind of implied that was his one big scandal, and the way they present it is just as confusing as how Reagan addressed it. And the movie doesn't take this take, but I personally think his response to Iran-Contra was so confusing because he was probably developing Alzheimer's at that point. It will never be confirmed if it was, but I think there are a lot of rumors that, not rumors, but a lot of people believe that he might have been developing symptoms of Alzheimer's years earlier than we knew. And I think that's very much possible, and it could be why he responded so oddly to Iran-Contra. But also, just the way the movie presented it, they just defended him so hard in the scandal, to the point where they were like defending the Contras, where Reagan was saying that, yeah, arming the Contras was a good thing. Selling weapons to the Contras was a positive. We should be arming them. Like, that really seemed to be the take the movie was taking. Even if Reagan actually did that, he was in the right. But during that conversation, he said the famous "we don't negotiate with terrorists." But he was actively funding them. So we don't negotiate with them, we fund them. We arm them. Yeah, sounds right to me, I guess. Like, and they had him recreate a couple of those famous speeches. I think there were a few televised press announcements of him being like, da 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 da. And in a lot of these press, stunts he did, a lot of them were active lies. A lot of the stuff he said in those press films, whatever, the press appearances, he was lying. They were not true. And then they made a big deal about like, oh, you're gonna get impeached, like this isn't politics, this is personal, which impeachment, it's politics and whatever. They didn't address why he'd be getting impeached. It's because he was dishonest and he was running a team of people who were doing sleazy things because they thought that's what Reagan wanted. I could do a whole video on Iran-Contra. It's so fascinating and I don't think can be understudied. But the way this movie just like, they just present it as like, oh, it's a scandal. He was being too unfairly prosecuted for doing something not that wrong. And he didn't even really know about it, which that I think we'll never really know how much he knew about it. But regardless, Reagan had a team so big and convoluted in terms of communication that like a lot of people never directly communicated with him that were on his team. And that could have been one of the reasons Iran-Contra happened. I mean, it's just too complicated to just put into a movie unless you're just trying to defend him, where you just kind of make it seem like not a big deal, which is just what this movie did. Honestly, I think there could be a whole mini series on just the Iran-Contra scandal, but that would require nuance and not rehabilitating the reputation of President Reagan. Anyways, I've been yapping for so long now, and this has probably been really convoluted. Hopefully I make a lot of sense, and hopefully you won't go see this movie, and hopefully maybe you've learned a little bit of history from me being mad about how a person was presented in media, because there's nothing worse than presenting, things that actually happen in a dishonest way. And this movie is just that the whole time. Do not go watch this movie. Watch Oppenheimer instead, I don't know. Or go watch, Legion Miller's video or the Cynical Historian's video. I hope you don't go see this movie. I hope you enjoyed watching this video. I hope you learned a little bit. And I'll see you when I see you. Bye bye.